If you're relatively new to programming and you've come across nested for loops and just felt totally overwhelmed and confused, then you are not alone. When I was first learning to program, I remember these things were just a real terror. I just could not seem to wrap my head around them and really understand how they worked. So my goal with this video is to break down nested for loops in a way that makes it incredibly easy for you to understand them and that allows you to comfortably include them in your own projects. So I've set up a basic example here in Unity, and for now all we have is just a single for loop. This is not yet a nested for loop. I would also like to point out this is in C#, but this really applies to most any programming language or game engine. I mean, at the end of the day, a for loop is still a for loop, no matter which language you're using. But as you can see, the current for loop that you're looking at is quite simple. All it does is just count from 1 to 3, and then it prints the result on the screen. So we have the variable I that's initialized to 1, and then it continues to increase by 1 as we iterate, and then when I becomes 4 we kick out, so it's only going to print 1 to 3. So I mean, that's pretty simple. If you're familiar with for loops, that shouldn't be a big deal at all. So now let's turn this into a nested for loop. This is when it gets a little crazy if you're starting out and you don't really understand how they work. So let's go ahead and just throw a second loop in there. We're going to throw this loop underneath the original for loop's debug log. And now this second loop, instead of counting 1, 2, 3, this one is going to start at 10 and it's going to count down. It's going to go 10, 9, 8. So how exactly is this going to work now? Are we going to do 1, 2, 3 and then 10, 9, 8? Which loop's going to run first? How's it going to work? This is where it can get really wild trying to wrap your head around it. And the way that I've made it easy for myself to understand how nested for loops work is to follow this simple rule. When you encounter an inner loop, it must finish, either run to completion or be broken out of, before the outer loop can ever iterate again. So to repeat that, because it's very important, the inner loop must finish before the outer loop ever iterates. So let's break this down. Let's act like we're sort of going through it as the computer. So we start with the outer loop, of course. That's going to print 1. And then we hit this new inner loop that I've introduced. This is the one that I told you is going to count down. It's going to do 10, 9, 8. So what's going to happen? Remember that rule that I just told you. An inner loop must finish before the outer loop iterates. So that means that this inner loop, this 10, 9, 8 loop, it's got to finish. It's got to print 10, 9, 8. So that's what it's going to do. It's going to print 10, 9, 8, and then that inner loop is done. And now we go back up to the outer loop, because guess what? We're not finished with it yet. It's going to iterate. So the 1 is going to become 2, and then we're going to print 2 in the debug log. Once that happens, we go back down. Guess what? We've hit the inner loop again. So we're going to do 10, 9, 8. The inner loop is finished. We go back up to the outer loop. I becomes 3. So we're going to print 3 in the debug log. We hit the inner loop one more time. It's going to go 10, 9, 8. And then we go back up to that outer loop. And guess what? I has become 4. So that condition is no longer true. 4 is not less than 4. So we abort out. So what we have done is we have printed 1, 10, 9, 8, 2, 10, 9, 8, 3, 10, 9, 8. And the reason that happens is because of that very important rule. It's the rule you have to keep in mind to be able to understand how nested for loops work. Anytime you encounter an inner loop, that inner loop is like a self-contained loop. It has to run to completion before the loop that contains it, the outermost loop, can ever iterate again and run again. So if you keep that in mind, I feel that makes it far easier to comprehend. So if you're struggling with nested for loops, I really hope this video has helped you see the light And really, I think one of the best things you can do is just start writing nested for loops. Try writing your own, try experimenting with them, and just look at the results that you get. And as you follow that important rule that I told you about, and you sort of look at the results that are coming back from your own code that you're writing, I think you'll really start to understand how they work and really just start to become far more comfortable with them. So if this has helped you out, please let me know in the comments below. I really have my fingers crossed that this is going to help some of you guys get over that hill, because like I said, when I was first learning to program, nested for loops were just brutal. They really just did me in. But that's about it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Again, I really hope you learned something. This is Chubbs signing out.